Hey guys, tonight we're slipping off our sandals and shuffling quietly into the dim, incense-scented corridors of an ancient Babylonian temple. The air is thick with the smell of clay and warm dust, and somewhere nearby, a scribe mutters softly as he inscribes a wedge-shaped symbol into a still damp tablet. Shelves made of mud brick line the walls like uneven teeth, each niche cradling a fragile slice of human memory. You crouch, gently lifting a clay tablet the size of a modern smartphone. It's heavier than you expected, denser too, like it's still soaked with time. You probably won't survive this library visit if you're expecting a comfy armchair and a latte. For one thing, the seating here consists of stone steps, or, if you're lucky, a woven reed mat that's been in service since Hammurabi was a toddler. Also, the staff-to-visitor ratio? Pretty grim, unless you count the temple goat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step deeper into the temple's archive chamber, each footfall soft in the dust. The silence isn't empty. It thrums with centuries of repetition. Scribes bent over clay, priests murmuring prayers as they filed receipts for sheep tithes, messengers bursting in with a new edict from the king. The past is never truly quiet here. Clay tablets were the primary medium of writing in Mesopotamia, and Babylonia was no exception. Unlike papyrus or parchment, clay was durable, abundant, and happily unappetizing to insects, basically the librarian's dream. To write, scribes would use a stylus, often carved from a reed, pressing it into a wet tablet to create patterns of wedge-shaped marks. That writing system, cuneiform, literally means wedge-shaped. Not because it's chic, but because reeds and mud don't leave much room for stylistic flourish. The average tablet wasn't some poetic scroll. Many were humble horses of information, lists of barley rations, records of trades, letters to relatives, and tax documentation. It's a little like walking into someone's hard drive and only opening the spreadsheets. But don't let the gray monotony fool you. Some tablets shimmer with cultural richness. Mythological tales, epic poems, and lullabies were preserved on the same shelf as temple inventory logs. Babylonian libraries weren't categorized by genre, but by function. You could have a love incantation right next to a field boundary contract. Because who doesn't need a little divine intervention before plowing season? One fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe that temples had reference copies of key documents. Standardized texts carved in high detail and tucked safely away, while more disposable versions made the rounds. It's the clay equivalent of having a fancy hardcover edition and then a cheap paperback for your cousin to borrow. Historians still argue whether these temple libraries were open to the public in any way. Was there a commoner's corner with easier texts, or were these archives strictly off-limits unless you were part of the priestly or scholarly elite? There's tantalizing evidence in both directions, letters that reference accessing the writings, and records of students copying from temple texts, but no clear Babylonian version of open shelves. So if you're hoping to stumble in and browse on your own, you may want to bring a bribe for the head scribe, or a goat. Goats seem to open a lot of doors. It's dusk now, and the glow from oil lamps flickers against the plastered walls. A junior scribe squats in the corner, reciting vocabulary drills while his older colleague scratches away at a fresh tablet. His stylus taps with quiet rhythm, like the sound of gentle rainfall. The air is heavy with concentration, and also the unmistakable scent of overripe dates. You find yourself wondering, did they love their job? Or was this dusty work as tedious as it sounds? We'll never know for sure, but traces of affection appear. Tiny flourishes, scratched drawings, or complaints buried in the margins. The king is a lion, but also a headache. Same. You lean back against a mud brick column. Maybe you're not fluent in Akkadian, but the shapes are strangely soothing. Tiny echoes of voices that once stood here, quietly trying to make sense of their world with nothing more than a stick and some clay. And now, you're here too, in their echo.
You blink slowly, letting your eyes adjust to the faint orange glow of the oil lamps. Your fingertips trace the surface of a nearby tablet, warm, gritty, and slightly concave from the hands that have held it over the centuries. It's filled with cuneiform, a script that to modern eyes looks like abstract art. Rows of short, angled wedges pressed neatly into the clay, like a very determined bird walked across it in tiny shoes. Cuneiform wasn't a stylistic choice. It was born of practicality. The ancient Babylonians didn't have parchment or ink. They had clay, reeds, and time. Lots of time. The stylus, a humble piece of cut reed, was the scribe's best friend and constant companion. If you lost it, you couldn't just swing by the nearest tablet store. You had to carve another one and hope your handwriting still looked respectable. You crouch beside a young scribe who's muttering under his breath. He's copying a proverb. Do not neglect your work. The net of the gods catches the lazy. Inspirational stuff. His stylus flicks and presses with rhythmic patience. Each mark is deliberate. Because once the clay dries, you can't take it back. There's no backspace key in 2000 BCE. Here's the thing. Cuneiform started as simple picture writing. A fish looked like a fish. A house looked like, well, a square with a line through it. But over time, those cute drawings got squashed, abstracted, and rotated into the wedge marks we know today. By the time the Babylonians came around, it was all lines and triangles. Elegant in a my cousin's learning calligraphy with a popsicle stick kind of way. A mainstream historical fact for you. The Babylonians didn't invent cuneiform. The Sumerians did centuries earlier. But the Babylonians took it and ran with it, adapting it to write in Akkadian, their own language. Cuneiform became the text of administration, science, magic, and love letters. Yes, love letters. Imagine declaring your feelings with a block of mud, romantic and inconvenient. Here's the quirky bit. Scholars have uncovered tablets where scribes practiced their symbols over and over, some of them doodling random shapes or even their own names repeatedly. One particularly bored scribe drew what might be the oldest known Kilroy was here equivalent, just a squiggle and his name with no context on a tablet edge. Was he proud, lonely, or just avoiding math class? And here's a question that still tickles the experts. How did these scribes actually learn to write fluently? Historians still argue whether they memorized massive lists of signs by rote, practiced with spoken language drills, or relied on recitation games with other scribes. Some tablets include exercise versions of the same sentence repeated over and over, like a Mesopotamian "I will not throw clay in class." But there's no clear lesson plan that survived, so your guess is as good as theirs. The cuneiform writing process was methodical. You'd start with a fresh tablet, still damp from its clay bath. You'd press your stylus carefully, hard enough to leave a clean impression, soft enough not to crack the surface. And then once your work was done, you'd leave it to dry in the sun. Or, if it was super important, you'd fire it in a kiln. Those were the VIP tablets, the permanent records. Others could be soaked and reshaped for reuse, like hitting delete with water and a little elbow grease. As you move through the library chamber, you notice tablets sorted by content. Mythic epics here, administrative ledgers there, recipes, rituals, omen texts, and star charts. But you also notice shape plays a role. Some tablets are oval, square, some unusually long and thin. Turns out those shapes weren't aesthetic. They signaled the tablet's use or origin. It's like judging a book by its cover, or a clay pancake by its circumference. The air here carries the faint scent of scorched earth and ash. Some of these tablets survived centuries of being buried beneath ruins, baked accidentally by city fires. Archaeologists later found them in perfect condition, like messages in a bottle, but the ocean is time. It's funny how destruction can preserve so well. Back in the moment, you settle onto a woven mat, pretending it's a cushy beanbag. A temple attendant ambles past, balancing a stack of tablets tied in a netted rope. No barcodes, no spreadsheets, just a mental map of what goes where. You imagine being the poor apprentice who shelved one wrong and got side-eyed by the head scribe for a month. Rough. And then there's the sound. Not silence, but quiet activity. The scratch of stylus on clay, the rustle of robes, the drip of oil from a leaky lamp. It's all slow, deliberate, purposeful. Every action here means something, even if it's just tidying the corner where broken tablets go to die. You reach out and gently pick up another tablet. The title is etched boldly along the edge. It's not poetic. It says something like, Monthly Beer Ration Inventory, District 4. Not exactly bedtime reading, but still oddly satisfying. Because even 4,000 years ago, people were organizing, recording, and just trying to keep track of the beer. You lean back, tablet in hand, letting your eyelids droop a little. There's something hypnotic about it all. The methodical symbols, the quiet purpose, the feeling that even now you're part of the ritual, an honored guest in a library that time forgot but didn't erase.
You stretch your legs a little, careful not to knock over the low stack of tablets beside you. They're surprisingly stable for ancient documents, but you wonder, how on earth did they keep track of all this? No titles printed on a spine, no Dewey Decimal System, no stern librarian whispering over her glasses, just shelf after shelf, well, niche after niche, of tablets, some so similar they look like twins in a mud brick nursery. And that's where the Babylonians get clever, because yes, they actually did have a system, a deeply boring, gloriously bureaucratic, ink-free system for tracking who borrowed what and when. Welcome to the world's first library card catalog. No laminated cards, no scanned beep, just clay, styluses, and the unstoppable will to file things. It starts with colophons. That's a fancy word for a kind of endnote scribes added to the end of a tablet. Think of it as the tablet's resume. It might say who copied it, when, where, who it belonged to, and sometimes what number it was in a series. If you're thinking, that sounds like the credits at the end of a Marvel movie, but with more sheep references, you're not wrong. Now imagine you're the head scribe. Someone comes in and requests a copy of the king's new temple regulation decree, you know, the one about goat tithing penalties. You'd check the index tablets, which listed holdings by subject, shape, or ownership. Some tablets even had catalog numbers or phrases like Tablet 2 of 5, scratched neatly into the edge or back. Basically, they invented sticky notes, just with more permanence and fewer colors. Here's your mainstream fact. The Library of Ashurbanipal, though technically Assyrian and a bit post-Babylonian, preserved hundreds of tablets with just such cataloging systems, showing how the practice likely had earlier roots in Babylonian times. If you dropped one, good luck reshuffling. Alphabetization wasn't a thing yet. A quirkier tidbit? Some colophons included outright shade. One translation ends with, "Whoever alters the words of this tablet may Nabu, the god of scribes, confuse his calculations and smash his stylus." That's right, Babylonian passive aggression, inscribed for eternity. Take that, anonymous editor. But what about overdue returns? Historians still argue whether Babylonians enforced return deadlines.
Some tablets imply that certain items were on loan from temple libraries to scribes or other institutions. Others appear to have been copied and kept off-site with nothing but a note in the main archive. Copy exists with the priest of Adad, City District 3. So the ancient equivalent of, "It's with my cousin, I swear." And if a tablet went missing? Well, there wasn't a fine, but there was eternal damnation, or at least a sternly worded curse. Some scribes inscribed warnings like, "Return this tablet to the temple of Nana, or the moon god will darken your fortune." Imagine if the public library tried that today. "Please return the very hungry caterpillar, or suffer locusts." As you walk the length of one wall, you notice groups of tablets tied together with fiber cords or stored in clay jars with wax seals. Sometimes there was a tag attached with a string, bearing a brief description or the name of the scribe. Picture an ancient filing cabinet where the drawers are jars and your filing tabs are bits of reed. You squat beside one such bundle, cautiously examining a faded tag. The cuneiform is smudged, but readable. Incantations for stomach demons, copied by Enlil-Idin, Year 7 of King Amidatana. You pause. That's oddly specific. Also, stomach demons? Maybe they had Babylonian Taco Tuesday. You hold the jar up and shake it gently. Inside, the tablets thump dully. There's something weirdly comforting about that sound, like maracas for historians. Each thud a whisper from someone long gone, still trying to explain how to banish bad dreams or record barley taxes in triplicate. Now here's something that truly boggles. Some tablets were multi-columned and wrapped around curved surfaces. Think of it like a clay scroll, but heavy and utterly unforgiving if dropped. And then there were duplicates. Same story, different scribe, sometimes slightly altered. Scholars debate whether that meant a scribe got lazy, took creative liberties, or was simply writing from memory. Honestly, it's probably all three. Historians still argue whether libraries were ever centralized across Babylonian cities. Were temple collections independent? Did scribes travel between cities to swap copies like dusty book traders? Or did some god-tier librarian have a master list of who owned what scroll where? The evidence is tantalizing, scattered, and full of contradictory footnotes, much like a teenager's book report. You feel a breeze brush past. Someone has opened a side entrance. Outside, the night air has cooled. A goat bleats softly. You suppress a chuckle. If only that goat knew it was once part of the kingdom's economic records. You turn and gently return the tablet to its slot, following the markings scratched into the shelf. A half-moon notch means religious text. A triangle means administrative. A circle? Well, some think it just meant miscellaneous. Even in Babylon, they had junk drawers. As you settle once more on your mat, you look around this dusty vault with newfound awe. It's not just a library, it's a labyrinth of human thought, each line etched with purpose, frustration, or hope. Each tablet a quiet declaration, "I was here. I learned something, and I wrote it down."
You ease back onto your mat, the woven fibers just rough enough to remind you you're in a space built for durability, not comfort. Around you, the Babylonian library stretches out in its peculiar order, less like a modern institution, more like an enormous memory palace made of dust, baskets, and divine obligation. You glance to your left and spot something unusual. Not a shelf, but a stack of woven reed baskets, each brimming with clay tablets. No neat rows, no tidy labeling, just organized chaos. These baskets were the unsung heroes of Babylonian information management. They didn't look like much. but they got the job done. And you'd better not kick one over by accident, or you'd be sorting through ancient complaints about barley shortages until dawn. The thing is, Babylonians didn't always use shelves the way we do. Sure, some wealthier temple complexes or royal archives had niches built into the walls, mud brick cubbies that held tablets in careful clusters, but more often, tablets were stored in bundles, jars, or these very reed baskets, stacked by function or recent use. It's a little like if you stored your entire music library in unlabeled shoeboxes and just knew which one held your favorite lullaby. Here's your mainstream fact. Archaeological digs at sites like Nineveh and Nippur revealed tablets lying in heaps, baskets, and jars, often still roughly grouped by subject. Some scholars believe there was a logic to the chaos, invisible to modern eyes, but clear to the scribes who worked there daily. And now for something a little more fringe. Some researchers believe that scribes may have used color coding on tablets or their cords, either through pigments or natural reed coloration, to help distinguish content types. It's not proven, but traces of red, yellow, and even blue pigments have been found on some bundles. Whether it was intentional or just the result of festive clay remains up for debate. Historians still argue whether this organization was intuitive to all scribes or if each library had its own bespoke logic. Did they follow standardized categories, religious, legal, economic? Or did each archive develop its own homespun system based on local need, like that corner's for angry letters and dream omens? With no surviving Babylonian instruction manual, we're left to guess. Poorly. You shuffle over to a basket labeled with a deeply scratched symbol, possibly a goat, maybe a mountain. Inside are tablets of various shapes, some cylindrical, others flat and square like mini paving stones. You pick one up. It's warm to the touch, having sat near the oil lamps. The script is cramped, densely packed, no margins. Someone was clearly trying to fit a lot of divine wisdom into a small space. As you examine it, you notice the tablet has a slightly curved surface. That was no accident. Curved tablets were easier to hold with one hand while reading, Babylonian ergonomics at its finest. And they weren't meant to lie flat. You'd prop one against a basket rim or your knee, squinting by lamplight to decipher its tiny wedge trails. Your wrist aches just thinking about it. You glance upward. A wall niche holds a strange-looking tablet, long, thin, almost like a baton. Turns out this style was often used for official correspondence. They were light, easy to carry, and clearly designed with messengers in mind. Think of it as the Babylonian version of a slim MacBook Air, except very breakable and also mud. A nearby scribe shuffles past, humming quietly as he rearranges a small pile of tablets near the shrine entrance. He doesn't use labels. He taps each one, muttering the opening line aloud. That's right, Babylonian librarians often identified tablets by their incipit or first line. There were no titles as we know them. You remembered texts by their opening phrases. Imagine calling your favorite book, "It Was the Best of Times," or "Call Me Ishmael," because that's how people would recognize it on the shelf. So how did they avoid confusion? Well, sometimes they didn't. Duplicate copies would float around with slightly altered phrasing or scribal errors. The system wasn't perfect, but it was intimate. You didn't browse, you remembered. A true oral-visual hybrid where your voice and your eyes and your fingertips all helped you find what you needed. You sit cross-legged now, watching the gentle shuffling of scribes as they work. One nudges a tall jar with his toe and pulls out a flat bundle tied with sinew. He murmurs a line to himself, then nods. Yep, he found the right epic. Even their jars had personality. Some were stamped with seals, an impression from a ring or cylinder roll, often marked with the owner's name or the patron deity. Others had geometric patterns or inscriptions like House of Tablets, South Wall, very official sounding, very dusty. As you rest your eyes for a moment, the gentle tapping of styluses becomes a kind of rhythm, like rainfall or the quiet breathing of a room asleep with its eyes open. You think again of the baskets, the jars, the niches. No computers, no index cards, just tactile memory, sensory intelligence, organized chaos so old that it loops back around to being sort of brilliant. And maybe that's the real secret. Babylonian libraries weren't about access for everyone. They weren't about simplicity or ease. They were about continuity, passing down knowledge in forms that could survive fire, flood, and forgetfulness. Every reed basket, every mud brick shelf, every clumsy clay jar cradled the desperate hope, please remember this. And now, you are.
You shift slightly, adjusting your weight on the mat, which creaks softly beneath you. A low murmur of voices carries through the temple's stone corridor, barely whispers, the kind you'd hear in a quiet study hall, if the study hall also smelled like roasted barley and had a shrine in the middle of it. Near the corner, a group of young scribes huddle around a long, low table. They're hunched over clay tablets, styluses in hand, brows furrowed with the kind of exaggerated concentration only teenagers trying to impress a stern mentor can muster. And just to the left stands the mentor himself, a senior scribe with a posture forged from decades of writing while crouched, and an expression that says, "If one more of you confuses the sheep ration glyph, so help me Marduk." Today's lesson, stylus discipline. Because you don't just pick up a reed and start scribbling. Oh no. This is a skill, a craft, a lifelong commitment to angle, pressure, spacing, and silence. Mainstream fact time. Becoming a Babylonian scribe could take over a decade. Most began as boys, often from priestly families, and trained under strict teachers in temple schools known as edubas, or tablet houses. These weren't cheerful classrooms with recess and apple slices. They were rigid, disciplinary, and deeply concerned with proper wedge alignment. One poor trainee scratches a line, frowns, and smears it out with a damp cloth before reapplying the stylus. The clay is forgiving until it's not. Once it dries, mistakes become permanent, preserved for eternity. Or more likely, the apprentice will toss it in the discard pile and start over. You glance at that pile, wobbly, jagged-edged rejects, stacked like a shame tower. There's something quietly beautiful about their dedication. These weren't kids memorizing phone numbers or solving word problems. They were transcribing entire myths, tax records, diplomatic correspondence, and incantations about stomach demons. And they did it all without notebooks, whiteboards, or even a second chance once the tablet dried out of shape. Here's the quirky bit. Styluses weren't one-size-fits-all. Some scribes carved different tips. Flat ones for standard signs, sharp ones for detail, and even curved ones for smoothing out mistakes or adding decorative edges. Archaeologists have found styluses with worn-down tips, chewed ends, and even doodled names on them, proof that even ancient students loved customizing their tools. Stylus pride is forever, apparently. And what did these aspiring scribes wear? Not robes, not armor, not breeches, but simple linen kilts or skirts, depending on the era and region. Breezy, unrestrictive, and probably very forgiving for long squat sessions. One wonders if Babylonian gym teachers recommended clay posture stretches to prevent stylus elbow. Historians still argue whether women could become scribes. The evidence is tantalizing but unclear. Some temple records suggest female scribes existed, especially in religious settings or palace households, but were they common? Celebrated? Respected? The debate lingers like incense in the rafters. Subtle, smoky, unresolved. Back at the table, one boy nervously presents his tablet to the instructor. The older scribe turns it in his hands, grunts, and raises one eyebrow.
Your determinative for ox looks like it wants to be a duck, he might be thinking. The boy deflates just a bit, but takes the tablet back with a solemn nod. Tomorrow's another clay day. You sidle up behind them, unnoticed, and peer at their work. They're practicing with model texts, classic phrases from earlier works that help them learn rhythm, spacing, and vocabulary. Think of it as Babylonian copywork. Instead of "the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog," they get "the king has sent barley to the temple, do not delay its measure." Equally thrilling. What's more, these scribes didn't just memorize characters. They memorized meaning, context, even parallel readings. A single cuneiform sign might have multiple meanings depending on placement. You'd have to learn all of them. It's like playing Wordle with rules written in Akkadian. And for those especially gifted, well, the path could lead upward. A place in the temple administration, royal court work, even espionage. After all, if you can read secret messages from distant lands, you're halfway to being a Babylonian James Bond, minus the tuxedo, plus a lot more dust. You lean against the mud brick wall, enjoying the scene. The soft scrape of stylus on clay, the occasional muttered curse when a line goes wrong, the quiet pride when a tablet is handed over with clean lines and no smudges. These kids are the reason the epics of Gilgamesh survived, the reason we know what Babylonian farmers ate, the reason someone wrote 4,000 years ago, "The gods take joy in a well-aligned account." There's no glamour here, no drama. Just the slow, methodical grind of learning to write in a language made of wedges. And yet, something about it feels oddly heroic. These weren't warriors. They were scribes. But they battled forgetfulness, chaos, and time itself with nothing but clay and a sharpened stick. As the oil lamp flickers and the scent of warm earth settles around you, you realize you could sit in this moment forever. The repetition, the discipline, the soft, deliberate making of meaning. It's a kind of meditative magic, Babylonian ASMR, one wedge at a time. You take a moment to stretch your legs, rising slowly as if you've become a part of the dust and silence yourself. One of the young scribes nearby lets out a small yawn and rubs his eyes. Even the most diligent wedge writer needs a break now and then. You wander to the edge of the chamber, where a cluster of tablets is stacked near a low stone bench. These aren't training texts. These are the real thing. The stories, the spells, the riddles, and the records of a people who somehow managed to find time to write, even when dodging floods, wars, and very judgmental gods. And now you ask yourself, what did they read for fun? Let's be honest, ancient Babylonian entertainment probably wasn't binge-worthy in the Netflix sense. There were no plot twists involving surprise heirs or dramatic unmaskings at royal balls. But the Babylonians weren't joyless. They had literature. They had humor. They even had dreams, literally written down and categorized. Like, if you dream of being bitten by a pig, fortune awaits. Your eyes catch a curious tablet, a little chunk of clay with columns of neat cuneiform. It's from the Series of Signs of Heaven and Earth, an omen text that reads like the world's most anxiety-inducing horoscope. One line translates as, "If the moon appears red and dim, lions will roam the city gates. Sleep tight." Mainstream fact. Babylonian literature included everything from myths and hymns to riddles, proverbs, medical texts, and epics. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature, was copied and recopied across libraries for centuries, and yet it sat side by side with manuals like Procedures for Treating a Bruised Liver. They didn't exactly have genres, but there was clear variety. Religious hymns, lists of synonyms, instructions for brewing beer. Yes, really. And best of all, riddles.
actual riddles. One clay tablet from the early 1st millennium BCE includes this gem. He who eats what is given to him, but gives nothing in return, what is he? Spoiler, it's a stove. And here's a quirky little gem. Some tablets are full of mischief. Scholars have uncovered a few texts with parody hymns or absurd medical advice, like applying fish brine to the eyes. Was it serious? Satirical? Historians still argue whether these were jokes, mistakes, or early Babylonian sarcasm. Honestly, we can all relate to giving bad advice just to see if anyone will take it seriously. You pick up another tablet, flatter and darker, like it's absorbed too many years of incense smoke. The first line is familiar. Gilgamesh, who saw the deep. It's one of the most copied openings in Mesopotamian education. The tale of the great king of Uruk, who sought immortality only to discover the inevitability of loss and the value of legacy. Deep stuff for a civilization that also cataloged how to remove a demon from someone's bathroom. As you run your fingers across the story's lines, you imagine a young scribe reading this by lamplight, eyes wide as the hero meets gods, defeats monsters, and then sits by a river quietly mourning his friend. It's a story still read today, 4,000 years later, which is kind of cool, especially for something written in mud. The quiet here is steady, broken only by the scratch of a stylus and the occasional sleepy sneeze. You look toward the rear of the archive, where older, more sacred texts are stored. Some are just fragments, half a love charm, the first lines of a hymn to Ishtar, or a broken weather report that promises south winds and slightly displeased deities. There's something deeply human in all this, even in a world ruled by divine kings, scorching heat, and zero indoor plumbing. People still found time to write down their dreams, their stories, their ridiculous puns. It wasn't always for power. Sometimes it was just to make someone smile. You sit again, drawing your robe tighter against the cool draft drifting through the temple corridor. The oil lamps flicker, throwing soft shadows against the clay walls. You imagine the scribes of the past sitting here just like this, scribbling quietly, reading aloud to one another, laughing at the same jokes, nodding off at the same confusing grammar drills. And yes, some tablets were read aloud. Babylonian culture placed great value on the spoken word. A tale wasn't just written, it was performed. Epic recitations, ritual chants, even bedtime stories for children. And with no punctuation in sight, reading aloud probably helped avoid the Babylonian version of "let's eat grandma." You lean your head against the wall, eyes half closed. Outside, a breeze stirs the hanging reeds near the entryway. Somewhere, someone is reciting a hymn to Nana, the moon god. The voice is soft, steady, rhythmic. It could lull even the most restless student into sleep. And for a moment, you wonder if some scribe once dozed off just like this, mid-line, stylus dangling from his hand, head resting gently on a stack of half-dried clay dreams.
The chamber has grown stiller now. Only the occasional footstep or distant owl call reminds you that the world continues beyond these thick temple walls. You shift your gaze toward a smaller alcove, darker, quieter, with a slightly different scent. Not just dust, but something sharper, spicier, a little smoky. You follow your nose and step inside. The air is heavier here, tinged with frankincense and something burnt. You blink slowly as your eyes adjust. On the shelves before you lie a very different kind of tablet, denser, more brittle, their inscriptions sharper, cleaner, often encased in little clay envelopes with seals stamped into the surface. You've just stepped into the realm of the magical texts. Welcome to the corner of the Babylonian library where curses are catalogued like recipes, where rituals to heal, hex, or honor the gods are filed between moon calendars and liver divination charts. And yes, you read that right. Liver divination. We'll come back to that. Your fingers brush the edge of a small square tablet. The first line warns, "Whoever removes this tablet from the temple of Ea, may his breath become smoke, and his bones shatter like unbaked clay." Well then, message received. Mainstream fact. Babylonian magic wasn't seen as superstition. It was science, religion, and medicine all rolled into one. Incantation texts were among the most commonly copied and stored in temple libraries. They covered everything from demon expulsion and protection spells to fertility chants and plague remedies. And here's a quirky detail you'll love. Some of these tablets were double sealed. That's right, locked up like a diary with your crush's name inside. The outer casing was baked shut and only cracked open in emergencies or specific rituals. That means somewhere in the dusty layers of time, someone was basically writing "only open in case of werewolf attack." You pick up one such casing. Its surface etched with a warning to anyone foolish enough to meddle with the contents. The seal shows a stylized dragon serpent, Tiamat, or maybe Mushusu. Hard to tell with 4,000 years of wear, but the message is clear. Magic was not a toy. Historians still argue whether these magical texts were standardized across temples or tailored by region. Some evidence suggests shared incantation styles, possibly taught through oral tradition. Others think each priest-scribe had their own collection of greatest hits, passed down like family recipes for spiritual emergencies. You open another shelf and find dream tablets. Yes, actual dream guides. Babylonian culture was deeply invested in dream interpretation. Dreams were messages from gods, omens of coming joy or disaster, or just plain weird. One tablet reads, "If a man dreams he is eating honey from a lion's mouth, he will gain power, but lose peace." Honestly, sounds like every modern promotion. These dream guides often came with instructions. Burn this herb, chant this name, bathe at this hour under a full moon while holding a black feathered dove. Not exactly casual bedtime reading, but in a world without therapists, they were what people turned to when life didn't make sense. A scribe enters the room quietly and begins sorting these magical texts with surprising care. You watch as he places each tablet into a shallow tray lined with soft cloth. These weren't filed by topic, but by potency. Protective spells here, curse reversals there, oath tablets with maims and witness seals tucked safely in the back. Some even include the phrase, "May this writing never be undone." And yet, not all of these were deadly serious. In a basket labeled Misk, you find a love incantation involving crushed figs, a clay figurine, and goose feathers. You stare at it for a moment. Somewhere in a city lit only by fire and moonlight, someone once muttered over goose feathers, hoping for a little romance. Humanity, you see, never changes. You linger by a tablet with a distinctive spiral pattern of text. This wasn't just stylistic, it was functional. The spiral let the reader chant continuously without turning the tablet. Brilliant. Slightly dizzying, but brilliant. As you settle on a bench, the scribe glances your way, then nods. It's a soft gesture, respectful, because you too are now part of this long line of observers, the keepers of stories, the silent companions of magic wrapped in clay. And yes, about that liver thing, Babylonians practiced extispi, the art of divining omens through animal entrails. They'd model sheep livers in clay, mark them with significant signs, and store them for teaching or ritual consultation. Imagine a classroom full of little clay livers on a shelf labeled Advanced Omens 302. The silence deepens. The scribe finishes his sorting, bows toward a small altar in the corner, and leaves. You remain, breathing in the sharp, spicy scent of spells, soot, and secrets. This room is quieter than the others, not solemn, just focused, like the very walls are holding their breath. Because here, writing was more than record-keeping. It was power, and power was treated with reverence, fear, and the occasional goose feather. You close your eyes and lean back against the warm stone. Somewhere beneath your fingertips, curses and blessings lie dormant, waiting for someone to read them aloud, or maybe just for someone to remember they existed at all.
You leave the scent of incense and ash behind, stepping quietly into a broader chamber. This one feels more lived in, less mystical. There are no warning inscriptions here, no curses engraved into clay, just shelves, simple mud brick ledges lined with modest tablets. The floor's dusty. A corner rug is fraying at the edges. This, you realize, is not the temple's magical library. It's the library of the forgotten scholars. Welcome to Nippur. Not as flashy as Babylon, not as politically central, but Nippur was sacred ground. A city devoted to Enlil, the storm god, and more importantly for you tonight, a city whose scribes left behind a treasure trove of tablets so rich and layered that modern archaeologists practically wept when they found them. And here's the twist. It wasn't found neatly stacked or labeled. It was found in ruins. Thousands of broken and scattered tablets in what had once been a scribal academy. Scholars call it the tablet dump, but that makes it sound like a mistake. In truth, it might have been more of a retirement party. Mainstream fact. The scribes of Nippur preserved religious, literary, legal, and administrative documents across centuries. Their archives represent some of the most comprehensive windows we have into Babylonian daily life, education, and literature, all from one dusty city that modern folks barely remember. You sit beside a pile of fragmented tablets, some the size of your palm, others large enough to serve as dinner plates. Many are cracked, as if dropped in haste or during a storm. Some even appear intentionally shattered, perhaps decommissioned, the ancient version of data wiping. What's odd is that some of these broken pieces are school exercises, half-completed vocabulary drills, partial translations, lists of synonyms, antonyms, and awkwardly phrased proverbs. The man who bathes only once a year will always find shade, one says, which might be deep or might be shade about hygiene. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some of the tablets contain student names, scribbled clumsily in the margins, like graffiti, or maybe an attempt to claim credit for a particularly neat work. One name pops up again and again, Idin Marduk. We know nothing about him, except that he was likely a student, possibly annoyed, and very, very fond of copying the phrase, "The river is swift, but the turtle waits." You run your fingers across a smoother fragment, part of a hymn to Ishtar. The lines are elegant, symmetrical, filled with poetic cadence. But right next to it lies a tablet covered in accounting records, lists of goats, lentils, beer quantities. It's like finding Shakespeare in one drawer and tax returns in the next. Historians still argue whether the Nippur Library was a temple repository, a school archive, or a combination of both. The presence of literary texts suggests education. The religious material suggests priestly training. But the mess, the wild disorganization, that feels human, like the chaos of a school just before summer break. And speaking of breaks, there's evidence here for humor, too. One scribe seems to have scratched a tiny caricature into a corner of a tablet, a crooked figure with a disproportionately large stylus, possibly meant to represent a grumpy teacher. It's comforting to know that even 4,000 years ago, students were doodling in the margins. You rise and move to the back of the room, where a set of shelves remain more or less intact. Here lie the texts of Enlil's priests, ritual instructions, weather omens, hymns of devotion. These are quieter tablets, reverent. Their lines are straighter,
their wedge marks more deliberate. You can feel the difference. These weren't copied for practice. They were copied for memory. And you realize something else. This room isn't just a library. It's a time capsule. A record not just of what was written, but who was writing, what they prioritized, what they feared, what they laughed at. A small jar in the corner draws your eye. Inside are narrow tablets, each marked with a single vertical column of signs. You lift one gently. It's a list of student names, possibly a roll call. Some are crossed out. Did they graduate, drop out, move away? It's unclear, but it hits you. This was a community, not just of scribes, but of learners, teachers, quiet thinkers bent over clay, carving meaning into time. You imagine them now, young and old, muttering through vocabulary drills, racing to finish assignments before sunset, and sneaking extra fig cakes when the head scribe wasn't looking. Maybe Ibn Marduk got detention once. Maybe he wrote a curse about it and hid it in the basket of liver omens. The sound of the wind through the corridor returns, a soft whistle. Outside, the stars over Nippur are visible, thousands of pinpricks lighting up a dark sky, just as thousands of tiny wedge marks light up these shelves. You sit back, letting your thoughts quiet. In this room, there are no grand monuments, no royal edicts, just fragments, scraps of practice, half-finished thoughts. But maybe that's what makes it so moving, because it's not about power, it's about people, just like you, just trying to learn, just trying to remember.
You step softly back into the broader temple archives, still wrapped in thought from the scribal school at Nippur. But the scent in this room is different, drier, dustier, and oddly enough, a bit like sheep. Because now you've reached one of the most surprisingly complex areas of the Babylonian library system, the economic records. Yes, that's right. Welcome to the God's grocery list. Don't be fooled by the lack of poetic verses or dreamy incantations. These humble clay tablets are the backbone of Babylonian civilization, carefully pressed with numbers, quantities, weights, and the occasional side note about someone failing to deliver a shipment of barley. Again. Mainstream fact: Babylonian temples functioned not only as religious centers, but also as economic hubs. They collected taxes, managed land, paid workers, stored food, and redistributed wealth throughout the city. Every transaction, no matter how small, was documented on clay. You crouch beside a wide, shallow basket filled with tablets, many of them stamped with the symbol for sheep or barley. One near the top reads like an ancient spreadsheet. 26 sheep received by the Temple of Marduk, 5 for sacrifice, 21 for feast day disbursement. You can almost hear the ancient accountant sighing as he etched those words. And here's a delightfully quirky detail. Some of these tablets list absurdly specific goods. One even tracks the delivery of 1 jug of oil, 1 dried fish, 1 pair of sandals, and 1 singing girl. Historians still argue whether the singing girl was an entertainer or just unfortunately grouped into the same line item as the fish. As your fingers brush a particularly worn tablet, you notice small punch marks along the edge. These were once string holes. The tablet could be tied to a bundle or hung on a peg, possibly to indicate a weighting distribution. A filing system with gravity, simple, effective, and guaranteed to swing gently in a breeze like a very bureaucratic wind chime. And what happens when the temple gets low on supplies? Well, that's where the order tablets come in. Some were written in haste, with sloppier cuneiform, as if the scribe was under pressure. You pick one up and squint at the text. Send more grain. We are 5 measures short. The festival is approaching. Do not delay. Honestly, it reads a little like a passive-aggressive post-it note. You walk further along the shelf and find rations logs, one for temple guards, another for construction workers.
Each entry records who received what and when. Kuduru received 2 loaves, 1 jug beer. Enlil Ibni received 3 fish, 1 sack lentils. Even workers who cleaned the sacrificial altars had their food tracked to the last crumb. But how did they know where to find the right tablet? That's where it gets fun. In economic archives, categorization often came down to content and format. Rectangular tablets with horizontal text equal daily reports. Square tablets with vertical columns equal inventory. Small oval ones equal receipts. And if it was a really important delivery, the scribe might slap on a colophon that said essentially filed under "Do not lose this or face divine punishment." Some tablets even included weights in both raw measure and converted units. Babylonians loved to double-check. One tablet reads, 1 shekel of silver received, confirmed by balance. A quiet whisper across time. Trust, but verify. And here's something even more surprising. They tracked temple livestock births. One tablet dryly notes, 3 lambs born, 2 healthy, 1 weak. Mother, registered EU number 44. It's so specific it hurts. Somewhere in Babylon, a shepherd once patted EU 44 on the head and whispered, "Good girl." As you rest your hand on a nearby ledge, you spot something different. A list of penalties. Fines for late deliveries, short waits, or missing goods. 1 silver shekel to be paid if the measure falls short. Accountability in clay. Historians still argue whether the scribes made personal notations, little hints of emotion or frustration. Some scholars believe certain odd marks might be exasperated sighs immortalized in wedge form. A few tablets bear double lines or underlined signs, as if to shout, "Seriously? This again?" You glance around at the quiet rows of tablets. These aren't stories meant to dazzle or amuse. They are work, structure, the unglamorous glue of civilization. But there's something soothing about that, isn't there? The rhythms of routine. The knowledge that someone, thousands of years ago, worried about missing lentils the way you might worry about running out of coffee. You pick up one last tablet from this section. It reads, 6 jugs of wine received for the festival of Ishtar, 3 stored, 3 consumed. There's no judgment in the text, but you smile anyway. Sounds like a solid party. And so you sit down again among the inventory of the gods, among jugs and fish and oil and sheep, among the ledgers that powered empires. You may never understand all the wedge marks, but the message is clear enough. Even the gods needed someone to keep the books straight.
You lean back against a warm mud brick pillar, taking in the quiet logic of the temple economy. So much order, etched so patiently. But now your eyes are drawn toward a different part of the archive, less dusty, better lit, and strangely geometric. As you step closer, you realize this area is for cataloging. No, not catalogs like you'd find in a modern library. There's no alphabetical index or neatly typed card. Instead, these are tablets grouped not by what they say, but by how they look. You kneel beside a low shelf where the tablets are lined up like bricks in a tiny clay fortress. At first glance, it's baffling. Some are wide and flat, others are long and thin, almost finger-shaped. A few are nearly round. You blink, confused. How does any of this help you find the right one? Then it hits you. This isn't about titles or subjects. This is about form. Welcome to the peculiar, wonderfully tedious world of Babylonian geometry-based filing. Mainstream fact. In Babylonian archives, shape, size, and layout of tablets were often as important for categorization as content. Certain tablet formats were reliably associated with particular types of information: school texts,
legal contracts, correspondence, or temple records. This made visual sorting not just useful, but essential. You pick up a small palm-sized tablet. It's domed like a lentil and fits perfectly in your hand. This type was typically used for short receipts, acknowledgments of payment, deliveries, or labor agreements. They're the sticky notes of the ancient world, but with the lifespan of a small hill. A scribe shuffles past, humming to himself, and gently rearranges a stack that had begun to slump. His eyes never scan the cuneiform, just the size and color. He knows the types by touch, like a potter picking out the right clay. That small rectangular one with 10 lines? Definitely a school exercise. That long, flat one? A royal letter. That dense square? A land deed, possibly boring enough to put even the chief priest to sleep. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some tablets had intentional corner notches or edge cuts. These weren't random chips. They were marks, possibly used to indicate sections of larger archives. Think of it as cutting a triangle into your folder to say, this belongs in the tax basket. Historians still argue whether this shape-based system was universal or regional. Did all scribes follow the same tablet taxonomy, or did each city have its own "this is how we do contracts" rulebook? Tablets from Nippur and Uruk suggest some standardization, but others are wildly inconsistent, as if one scribe simply liked triangles more than squares. You walk down the row and find another curiosity: multi-column tablets. These are longer, with 2 or more vertical columns of text. The lines are tight, methodical, like spreadsheet cells pressed into clay. These were often used for lexical lists, giant catalogues of words, meanings, and translations between Sumerian and Akkadian. Not thrilling content, but priceless for training scribes and preserving language. You lean in, reading the first few entries. Mountain equals Kur, bread, Ninda, star, Mul. It's a primer, a memory tool, and a linguistic time capsule all in one. And once you've read 5 or 6 lines, you start to feel oddly soothed. It's like flashcards, if flashcards could break your foot if dropped. You move on to wedge density analysis. That's right. Some tablets are categorized not by shape, but by how densely packed the signs are. A lightly inscribed tablet might be ritual or poetry. A densely packed one, probably legal or economic, cramming every spare corner with tiny wedges, like someone was afraid of wasting clay. And then there are duplicates. You spot 2 tablets with nearly identical markings, but one is thicker, the other has a broken edge. Scholars believe one was the original, the other a backup or a cleaner copy made for storage. Sometimes both versions were kept together, other times sent to different places. A decentralized system that somehow worked. You squat near a sealed jar labeled with a symbol for foreign city. Inside, the tablets are slightly different, sharper edges, more angular signs. Imported tablets, maybe? Messages from Assyrian allies or Elamite rivals. It's hard to tell, but their format sets them apart. Foreign letters came in specific styles, perhaps to aid in immediate identification. Like postmarks, but with more divine curses. There's even a tablet shaped like a pillow, not because they liked bedtime reading, but because it was easier to balance on the scribe's knee while copying from another source. The rounded base fits snugly into a lap. You pick it up. It is surprisingly ergonomic. Who knew ancient admin work had such excellent UX? As you stand again, a familiar whisper returns, the rhythm of styluses tapping gently, methodically. It's the same quiet energy you felt in every corner of this place. The slow hum of a system built not for speed, but for survival. Everything here is touch-based, sight-based, memory-based. It was a world built without folders, without passwords, without autocomplete. But somehow it held. You rest your palm on the top of the shelf. The clay is cool beneath your skin, the shelves warm from the lamp above. And for a moment, you feel a deep admiration for the scribes who memorized the difference between a round tax receipt and a square omen text, for the priests who trusted clay to carry the voice of the gods, and for the countless forgotten hands who built a system no one remembers but everyone still learns from. You shuffle farther down the archive aisle, and your foot brushes something unexpected, a shard of clay. Not large, not sharp, just a broken fragment with half a line of cuneiform etched into it. You stoop, pick it up carefully, and hold it to the light. It's part of a date. Year 6 of King, and then the name trails off. You've just found what may have once been a very important document, or a very unfortunate accident. Because not every tablet survived Babylon's dust and clay eternity unscathed. Many cracked, some crumbled. Others were definitely dropped by a sleepy apprentice trying to carry too many inventory reports at once. So tonight, let's step into the anxious, practical, slightly heartbreaking world of broken tablets. Mainstream fact: when clay tablets cracked or were damaged, Babylonian scribes didn't always toss them aside. Depending on the importance of the document, repairs were sometimes attempted via clay patching, recopying, or in some cases, reinscribing on the reverse side if space allowed. You move toward a bench near the side of the room, where broken pieces are stacked neatly in a shallow basket. They're organized by size, like a potter's puzzle waiting to be solved. A few fragments still show signs of repairs, fresh clay dabbed into cracks, or styluses re-etched over faint lines. One piece has a curved seam where two parts were rejoined. You imagine a careful scribe lining up the edges, mixing fresh clay and pressing it like an ancient jigsaw puzzle. No glue, no clamps, just water, time, and a great deal of patience. And possibly a very annoyed supervisor muttering, "You broke the king's goat list!" But not every tablet was salvaged. Some were recopied entirely, an exhausting process that required the scribe to read from the cracked original, transcribe onto a fresh slab, and hope no meanings were lost. And if the document was too badly damaged or too insignificant to matter, it went to the tablet dump. Quirky tidbit incoming. Certain damaged tablets were repurposed, especially for school use. A broken epic fragment might become a writing exercise or a math problem. One side could hold a proverb, the other a multiplication table. Talk about upcycling. Historians still argue whether broken tablets were ever ritually discarded. Some believe that temple archives held small graveyards of discarded texts, places where outdated or fractured records were respectfully deposited, not just thrown away. Others suggest they were smashed intentionally when obsolete, similar to deleting files, a clay farewell. You walk past one such discard pile now. The fragments lie quietly, their lines fractured, but still legible. One piece has only 2 words: was angry. Was it the end of a letter? The start of a spell? Or just a scribe's note about his mood after yet another late barley delivery? The air in this part of the archive is still, heavy, with the hush of broken things that still matter. You reach for a rounded tablet, its corner chipped off. The text ends mid-sentence. And so the contract shall be renewed each what? Month? Moon? Sacrifice cycle? You'll never know. And that's the strange poetry of these fragments. Each one a question half answered. Near a back wall you spot something rare, a fired tablet with gold-colored streaks where heat licked the clay unevenly. This one survived fire, probably an accidental preservation from a city blaze. Tablets that were sun-dried were fragile, but those fired, deliberately or by disaster, became nearly indestructible. Ironically, many of the best preserved tablets we have today exist because their libraries burned. You sit beside the fragment pile, letting your fingers skim over the broken surfaces. The grooves are shallow, worn by time and sand, but the stories are still in there, just scrambled. And then something odd. One fragment has a small etched mark on the edge. It's not a sign. It's a tiny footprint, possibly made by accident, possibly a signature, possibly the world's oldest joke. I stepped on your epic. Nearby, a scribe carefully copies from a cracked tablet onto a fresh one, lips moving silently as he works. The stylus clicks gently as he re-etches the wedges. He pauses now and then, squints, mutters. The process is slow, methodical, an act of both restoration and reinvention. Because even a broken line can be reborn, if you're careful. You watch in quiet respect. There's something intimate about this process. These weren't just administrative tools. They were voices, memories, testimonies. Losing them mattered. Saving them mattered more. You pick up one last fragment before you leave. A jagged corner with 3 symbols and a colophon. Copied by Nabu-Zeri, son of Ur-Enlil. Just a name, but that's enough. Because for a moment, in the warm dust and oil lamp glow, you feel like you know him.
You rise slowly, clay dust trailing from your palms. The air has shifted, not in temperature, but in tone. The room you now step into feels larger, grander, though no less silent. There's more space between the shelves here, and the walls are cleaner, smoother, fewer scrapes from careless elbows or sliding baskets. You've entered the collection of kings. Yes, that's right. Babylonian royalty weren't just warmongers and stargazers. They were also collectors of knowledge, some obsessively so. And not just for governance or administration, but for something more symbolic. Because in this world, possessing texts wasn't just practical, it was powerful. Mainstream fact. Several Babylonian and later Mesopotamian kings, such as Ashurbanipal of Assyria, who built his own massive library, amassed collections of tablets as symbols of divine favor, wisdom, and cultural supremacy. Though Ashurbanipal came after the peak of Babylon, this tradition had its roots in earlier Babylonian practices, where kings preserved sacred and scholarly texts as royal property. You glance along a shelf of larger, more carefully inscribed tablets. These aren't the hasty scribbles of a harried temple scribe trying to track lentil rations. These are purposeful, neat, almost elegant. And here's what's strange. They're not all in Akkadian. Some are in Sumerian, a dead language even in Babylon's time, maintained only by scholars and scribes. Imagine copying Latin texts today, just to show you could. And here's your quirky nugget.
Some kings had tablets copied solely for prestige, texts they couldn't read in languages they didn't speak simply because those texts were important. A bit like displaying books you'll never open just to prove you've read something. You lean down and examine one particularly smooth piece of clay. It's covered in a medical text listing symptoms and treatments. If the patient's eyes twitch and his speech falters, apply a poultice of date sap and crushed beetle. The science may be dated, but the impulse is timeless. A king wants to show he can heal his people, whether through knowledge or beetle paste. Historians still argue whether these royal collections were ever truly used or merely hoarded. Were they part of scholarly consultation, or just locked away like divine insurance policies? Some tablets bear signs of use, rubbing, fading, thumbprints. Others look pristine, as if made only to impress. As you walk the aisle, you notice something else: stamps. Many of these tablets bear royal seals, marks of ownership pressed like a brand into the clay. One features a lion surrounded by stars, another the winged disk of Shamash, god of truth and justice. It's not unlike the king signing his name at the bottom of a scroll, with divine backup. And the inscriptions themselves? Sometimes arrogant. One reads, "I, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, have gathered these writings for the preservation of wisdom, so that the gods may favor my name for eternity." So modest. You pause near a wall niche where several oversized tablets are stored upright. They're heavy, two-handed beasts like encyclopedia volumes. Some are epics, others are contracts. But one catches your eye. A star chart. Hand-drawn constellations mapped in wedge notation with predictions for celestial behavior and its earthly consequences. Kings wanted to rule the heavens, too. A quiet scribe in royal livery passes behind you, arms cradling a bundle wrapped in cloth. He kneels and places the tablets gently in a basket lined with reeds. They won't be read tonight. Maybe not for decades, but they've been added to the king's legacy. You sit, letting the hush settle around you. These shelves feel less like a library and more like a shrine, devoted not just to knowledge, but to owning knowledge. In ancient Babylon, kings were expected to be wise, not necessarily well-read, but at least wise adjacent. And these tablets proved it. You run your hand across a long, slim tablet bearing a dedication, copied for the great king, son of Sin, by his humble scribe, Marduk Zakir. The wedges are deep, deliberate, and perfectly aligned. This wasn't just a job. This was loyalty, a way to write one's name into history, alongside or just beneath the king's. Somewhere beyond the chamber walls you hear soft chanting, a priest beginning evening prayers. The sound echoes faintly through the corridor. You close your eyes and imagine it. A king sitting in a shaded garden, listening to a story read aloud from one of these very tablets. Maybe Gilgamesh. Maybe a hymn to Ishtar. Maybe just a funny omen about goats refusing to cross a river. Because here's the quiet truth. Even kings needed stories. Even kings needed to feel the world was knowable, ordered, contained within neat rows of wedge marks pressed into clay. And maybe, just maybe, the scribes who wrote these lines knew something the kings didn't. That knowledge doesn't belong to those who own it. It belongs to those who remember it.
The air changes again as you step into the next chamber, not because the space itself is different, but because the feeling is less reverent, more lived in. This is not a king's archive or a priest's vault. This is something simpler, homier. It smells faintly of damp earth, burnt oil, and goat. Definitely goat. You're now standing in what could be called the everyday wing of the Babylonian library. Not that it was labeled that way, of course. But this room houses the texts of ordinary life, the quiet clay reflections of a people trying to organize, record, and, yes, smell their way through a dusty world. Because if you truly want to understand a civilization, you must know what its rooms smelled like. Tonight, we're doing that. You kneel by a broad reed mat and breathe in the scents that still cling to the shelves and walls. The faint aroma of bitumen, used to seal jars and insulate bricks, the slightly metallic tang of fired clay, the dry peppery dust that clings to everything. And layered beneath it all, old smoke, goat hair, and the sticky sweetness of dried dates. Here's a mainstream fact. Babylonian archives, especially those in temples and palaces, weren't climate-controlled or protected from the nature. They were often open to the elements, wind-blown, sunlit, and dusty, which meant the experience of using the library wasn't just visual or intellectual, it was deeply sensory. And here's your quirky twist. Some scholars believe that strong smells may have helped scribes navigate the space. Certain texts, magical, medical, or cultic, were associated with herbs, incense, or oils. Their odor may have lingered, helping scribes remember, oh right, this shelf smells like camphor, must be the healing spells. Historians still argue whether libraries were intentionally scented. Did priests burn incense in specific corners? Were herbs placed near texts for preservation? Some incense recipes do survive, mixtures of myrrh, frankincense, juniper, and resin. Whether for ritual, atmosphere, or just masking the goat, we may never know. You walk slowly between two low shelves. The tablets here are simpler, thinner. Many contain short entries, diary-like notes, family debts, marriage contracts. One has a small thumbprint near the edge, as if the signer pressed it there to seal the deal. Another smells slightly of cedar. Perhaps it was stored in a fragrant box, or maybe it just absorbed the perfume of its owner. You pick up a narrow, dark tablet inscribed with a tenant lease. The text is blunt. One room, south-facing, granted to Nabu Erib by Bel Shunu for 3 measures of grain monthly. Tenant agrees to maintain floor and roof. Babylonian landlords, forever the same. A young scribe wanders in with a bundle of firewood. He lays it in the corner hearth and stokes a low flame. A pot of something, maybe spiced wine or barley stew, simmers nearby. You realize this room is more than archive. It's also a workspace, a social space, a place where knowledge and life overlap. You sit again, legs folded beneath you. The air now carries smoke and warmth, softening the chill from the stone floor. You reach for another tablet, this one flatter and rougher in texture. It's a weather log. Wind from the west, sky clear, crops steady, goats restless. Not exactly poetic, but practical, and oddly calming. And the goats? They're not just a running gag. Temple herds were real and important, sources of wool, meat, milk, sacrifice, and accounting headaches. One shelf here contains nothing but goat-related tablets. You find logs for breeding, birth counts, lost goats, borrowed goats, even a complaint. The goat lent to the carpenter has not been returned. Action must be taken. You lean closer to another shelf, curious now. There's a faint scent, earthy,
Damp, with a hint of something sharp. Garlic? Onion? No, sulfur. These are the medical texts, and not the serious priestly kind. These are folk remedies, instructions scrawled by midwives, herbalists, or wearied fathers with sick children. For cough, crush juniper with goat's milk, heat with river stone, administer before sunrise. To soothe belly, burn cedar chips, inhale deeply while chewing fig. To restore voice, soak reed in warm beer, hum until clear. You smile. It's all so strange, yet familiar. The attempts, the hope, the very human desire to fix what hurts. You inhale again and close your eyes. The smells drift and mingle. The warm clay, the old goat hair, the smoldering reed, the spice of distant incense, and somewhere beneath it all, the smell of words themselves, words made physical, pressed into earth, baked by time, waiting to be heard again. And now, you have.
You linger in the warmly scented stillness, but something draws you onward. Soft footsteps, a shifting breeze, perhaps just the whisper of unfinished stories calling from deeper shelves. Your path takes you down a narrower corridor now, one lined with mismatched storage jars and clay boxes stacked with no apparent pattern. And that's when you hear it. Hushed voices. Not real ones, of course, just imagined, echoing from the past. Scribal gossip, the clink of styluses, a muffled snort of laughter. Because tonight, we've arrived at one of the most underrated corners of Babylonian intellectual life, library rivalry. Mainstream fact. While Babylonian cities shared many religious and linguistic traditions, they also developed distinct scholarly identities. Scribes from cities like Babylon, Nippur, Uruk, and Sippar often maintained their own schools, myth variations, and even different versions of the same sacred texts. You step into a slightly crooked chamber, its walls patched where bricks have worn away. The shelves here aren't regal or refined. They're crowded, a little slanted, and absolutely bursting with personality. One scribe's tablet sits upright and is etched with a flourish, a stylized spiral in the colophon that reads, "Copied in the house of Enlil's wisdom, not by the hasty hands of the south." Oh, a little shade thrown at rival city scribes? Don't mind if we do. Here's your quirky gem. Some tablets found in Nippur or Babylon include marginal commentary that subtly critiques other versions of a text. Sometimes they correct a phrase with smug confidence. Other times they annotate with vague barbs like, "This differs from the Uruk copy, likely due to unfamiliarity." Academic Twitter, 2000 BCE edition. Historians still argue whether this scholarly shade was competitive, regional pride, or genuine intellectual disagreement. Some scholars see it as healthy dialogue, while others argue it may reflect real rivalries between temple schools vying for prestige. Either way, it's clear that the scribes had opinions and weren't afraid to bake them into clay. You kneel by a basket with several versions of the same myth, the descent of Inanna. One tablet ends with a triumphant return. Another adds a dramatic twist involving a goat-headed demon. A third simply trails off mid-line. You can almost hear the scribe muttering, "This version again? No wonder Uruk scribes keep rewriting it." And it wasn't just about myths. Lexical lists, omen texts, ritual formulas, they all had city-specific quirks. Babylon might write, "The star is angry." Might say, "The star sighs." Same omen, different tone. Regional dialects, cultural preferences, scribal laziness, no one can quite agree. You rise and follow the scent of warm oil to a small alcove. There, a narrow shelf holds duplicated tablets marked with city names,
Sippar, and Eridu. These were comparative texts, likely copied by traveling scribes or requested by kings curious about what other cities were teaching. Some include side-by-side entries, a Sumerian sign in the left column, its Akkadian meaning in the right, and occasionally a third column marked alt usage Babylon only. Proof that even ancient academics couldn't resist footnotes. You pick up a particularly smug-looking tablet, its lines sharp, its script immaculate. The colophon declares, "This is the correct version, as taught by the house of Ea, the true scribes." Imagine saying that with a smirk and a feather in your reed pen. You chuckle softly and set it down. The pride is palpable, but so is the dedication. These weren't petty squabbles, they were acts of devotion, of scribes who genuinely believed in the preservation of truth, however they defined it. A faint draft rustles through the corridor. You follow it toward a cracked window opening into a narrow courtyard. Moonlight spills across a worn bench, once used by scribes comparing texts aloud. One would read a line, another would correct it, a third would mutter something rude under his breath and go copy his own version out of spite. And yet they all survived, because rivalry, at its best, pushes a culture to grow. These scribes didn't just preserve knowledge, they refined it, argued over it, reimagined it, and in so doing gave us a richer tapestry of what Babylonian thought actually looked like. You walk back to the shelves, trailing your fingers across the rough spines of tablets shaped by disagreement. There's a certain intimacy to knowing these people disagreed, not violently, but intellectually. Like saying, "I love this myth, but your version's lazy and your goat demon doesn't make sense." And in that, they were deeply human. Because what is a library really, without a little drama?
The night has grown quieter still, as if the city beyond the temple walls has fallen completely asleep. The stars outside are sharp, clear, brighter than they seem in modern skies, unclouded by electric haze. You pause at the threshold of the final room, a hush gathering like cloth around your shoulders. This chamber is cooler, it feels older, and the tablets here don't shout with colophons or curses. They whisper. Because this is the last story of the night, the tale of a library that tried to outlive Babylon. Mainstream fact. In the ruins of Sippar, and especially in Nippur and Uruk, archaeologists have discovered libraries that were buried and forgotten, lost not by carelessness, but by time, invasion, and silence. And yet, when uncovered, they still carried intact records of what the Babylonians knew, believed, and feared. You kneel before a low shelf of fire-hardened clay. These weren't stored with reverence. They were buried, likely during a time of panic. Perhaps the scribes knew an attack was coming. Perhaps they hoped to preserve what they could in a shallow pit beneath the temple's western wall. One tablet reads simply, "Hymns for the Journey." It's not clear whose journey, a king's, a priest's, the city's, or maybe, quietly, everyone's. Another is a copy of the Epic of Gilgamesh, faded at the edges but still legible. And here's your quirky gem. This version contains a unique final line, a scribal flourish. The wall remains, so does the name. It doesn't appear in other copies. A local variant? A personal edition? Historians still argue whether it was intended as poetry or resignation. You move to the rear of the room, where a basket holds partially broken tablets, carefully packed in reeds and cloth. Whoever placed them here was trying to preserve, not for immediate reading, but for survival. These were not records for daily use. They were time capsules, gifts for the future. And you realize something remarkable. It worked. You are the future. You sitting in the quiet hours, listening to wedge marks turned into whispering stories. The library didn't survive the fall of Babylon, not physically, but its words did, its forms did. Its scribes are gone, but their breath is still pressed into clay. You run your hand over a smooth, dark tablet with a sunburst seal. The inscription is short, almost a mantra. What is written is not forgotten. You repeat it under your breath, and somehow the room feels warmer. There's something gentle in this final space. Not the reverence of the king's hall, not the spiced tension of the magical texts. This is a room for closing the book, for quiet endings, for remembering that even mud, pressed with care, can outlive marble. You sit, cross-legged, and close your eyes. No more rustling, no more stylus taps. Just the gentle creak of a reed mat, the earthy scent of baked thyme, and the understanding that you've been walking among ghosts. Not the frightening kind, the patient kind. And now let's slow everything down.
The soft air in this library doesn't rush, it drifts. It curls into the corners, stirring the scent of old tablets and warm reed mats. You breathe in that calm, a blend of earth, oil, and the faint sweetness of forgotten incense. The same air those scribes once breathed, the same stillness they once worked within. All around you, the stories remain, the barley lists, the letters home, the king's boasts, the apprentice's first try at a love spell, all stacked neatly, side by side, waiting, not for glory, not even for meaning, just for someone to care enough to listen. And you did. You let their voices in. You followed the trail of wedge marks down narrow corridors and warm stone benches. You held their knowledge in your hands. And even if you forget the names, or the goat records, or that poor tablet that cracked mid-sentence, you won't forget the feeling of being part of something quiet, careful, and ancient. So rest now, listener. Let your breath slow. Let the stories fade gently into the background, like tablets sliding back onto their shelves, safe for another 1,000 years. You're not in Babylon anymore, but part of you always will be. Good night.